Welcome to the problem structuring methods stream. One thing first, as soon as you're coming through the door, we've launched a poll and we would like to know how much you actually know about the SODA methodology. So if you could fill that poll in for us as you come in, we'd be very grateful. So before we go into the full track, a few housekeeping slides while you're all answering those polling questions. Can you please use the chat function to send us any messages so that we actually have them in the chat messages rather than raising your hand? Somebody will be keeping an eye on those all the time. Alternatively, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. Otherwise, they're unlikely to get answered at the end. There's also the possibility to upvote questions. So if you could put votes on those questions as the ones you find most popular, then we can make sure that we're getting consensus on those decisions there, as a good SODA methodology would do. During the presentation, there may be a series of polls. Well, there is one now, so please answer that poll as you're coming through the door now. A video of the session will be available after the conference, but it's going through some editing and stuff, so it may take a few days before it comes up. So if you can't see it, please keep coming back to see if it's up yet. So if you could keep polling, please, while Martin Parr, my co-chair of the Problem Structuring Methods SIG, introduces this session today. Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Welcome, everyone. Very interesting to see actually the numbers already in the poll. So we have a live version of it, which is proving to be very interesting. So welcome to a wonderful group of presenters today for this session. We have the founders of SODA, Fran and Colin, who don't need an introduction whatsoever. We're immensely fortunate to be able to have our sort of link up with them. One of the great things about a virtual conference is that we're able to bring in people from across the globe. So we have Fran in Australia joining us, and we're also immensely fortunate to have Leila and Alberto who are also joining us, who are going to look at how SODA has been used in the sort of the sort of next part of the journey of that evolution. So Leila's joining us from Brazil. So again, we're sort of we've been stretching the time zones a bit to try and find a time where we're not sort of asking someone to come on at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I won't say anything more. I think it's really a case of handing over. So please go ahead, Colin and Fran.
Just unmute myself and get rid of my slides. And just before I go, the polling as it currently stands, and it hasn't really changed very much, seems to be about 60 to 70% of people know a little about SODA, and then the rest is really pretty much equally divided between a lot and nothing. So that's a good point to start off on. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in that poll. And I shall stop sharing my screen and mute myself now. Thank you.
I think we're due to make a start. So I'm going to start before Fran takes over from me in a little while. I'm going to take the starting point of SODA right back to the 1970s. I'd been an operational researcher in the engineering industry and then a management consultant, and got quite exercised by the first point of contact with the client, the beginning of a possible project. And I was particularly interested in how you convince a client that you understand what they're facing and so what they want. And essentially it's about making sure that you don't solve the wrong problem, which was actually quite likely given my background. I'd done a PhD in dynamic programming, and I was definitely going out there hammer and screw in mind all the time. So it was about the listening process. How do you listen carefully to a client at the beginning? Notes were not very good because they're not easy to share with a client. They don't add any value. Verbatim transcripts are even worse. They're very boring things. So what I was looking at was how to represent their view and add value. That took me into cognitive psychology. I explored quite a lot of different fields of cognitive psychology, and gradually honed in on personal construct theory. George Kelly's work, because it seemed to me to explain what we were trying to do in operational research, because Kelly saw cognitive psychology from the perspective of problem solving. But the trouble was that he'd got a methodology for doing this called personal construct theory, incredibly tedious, very clumsy to use. And so that took me into trying to work out what Kelly was trying to describe in his body of theory. That took us into mapping as a process, cognitive mapping as a way of guiding an interview, helping with an interview process. And that was the fundamental start of SODA, because what we were trying to do was actually understand what the client was trying to tell us in a way that enabled us to feed it back with added value. In other words, do some structuring to what they were saying. Feed it back to them with some reward to the client. So in particular, though, the mapping guided the process of interviewing itself by spotting what you don't understand, spotting what was not elaborated, spotting the critical asides. The notion of contrasting poles, which was critical to George Kelly, the rather than, gave some sense of the meaning attached to some of the statements made by the client, but also, of course, the context, the ins and outs on the map, actually really with a fundamental aspect of meaning. The map captures structure, the notion of problem structuring. Structure, of course, is amenable to analysis. The analysis is where the added value came for the client. And we found that process, the early process of interviewing using the mapping, phenomenally powerful, not just for ourselves, but for the client as well. The feeding back of the properties of the map helped to devise a better contract for the work and change and refine, negotiate the problem specification. The problem changed for the client through the process of that feedback of the map. The mapping during the interview or the second interview was where a lot of that happened. That led us to using mapping as a basis for training a lot of consultants in the 1970s and 80s. And Fran joined me in the 1980s, and we did quite a lot of consultant training courses based on that. So that was the background to it. It was about training consultants to listen. It was derived from the listening ourselves. Messing About in Problems in 1983 was the first publication, I guess, that had some sort of impact in the OR world. Still a book that seems to be very popular. And of course, alongside that, then came the development of software to help with mapping, and with Decision Explorer later on, after COPE was developed in the first stages. So next slide, Fran. Just to give a quick example, you can see on the left-hand side there, there's a map in the form that you might take it during an interview. It's very messy as you're trying to write it down. The second picture shows that converted using the software, enables you to do some analysis and problem structuring. That's what you'd be using for feeding back to the client. And the third picture there just shows a little bit of that map in the form of, and you can see there in red, actually identification of a feedback loop, which is something you'd be talking to the client about. So next slide, you'll have a copy of these slides so you can pick up on these later on. Then we came to what I'm referring to here as SODA version 1. That was where we took cognitive maps of each participant. Those were usually based upon 45 to 60-minute interviews. The maps were usually 70 to 90 constructs or nodes on the map. That was the basis for then merging these maps into what we called a group cause map. It's a cause map because a group doesn't cognite, so it's not cognition. It's a way of actually building some way of getting the multiple perspectives into one view. That enabled the work with the group, where the group map was the basis for the facilitation. That became what we now would refer to as a boundary object. From that, we would reach agreement through a focused discussion using the map, what we would now call that as a transitional object, which was changed as the group discussed it, and gave us a way of giving attention to multiple perspectives, the multiple expertise and experience of members of the group. So that was SODA 1, the shift from cognitive maps to causal maps. And I'm now going to hand over to Fran, who will describe that development through what we're going to call SODA 2 and journey making and so on. Over to you, Fran.
Thank you, Colin. So I'm going to look at it from a group problem solving perspective and walk through various iterations. So we'll see SODA 2, 3 and 4. And as you can see from the graphic in the bottom left, there's two examples from Mike Pidd's book as beginning of that transition from SODA 1 to SODA 2. So if we look at SODA 2 and working with a client group, now this is very much developing cause, not cognitive, maps live, not in the back room. And one of the ways we did this was using oval mapping, and the photograph in the top right is me some time ago running an oval mapping workshop with a group. One of the nice things about oval mapping is it allowed people to express their views. Each oval allowed them to write a particular contribution up, and then these ovals would be pasted onto the flip chart paper attached to a wall, allowing everybody to be able to see what one another has contributed. What the facilitator would be doing is putting these into clusters with the intention of managing the complexity, and groups could work with, and it was not untypical for our oval maps to have over 100 ovals, could work with that if there were clear clusters emerging so they could mentally navigate that space. So we'd cluster them, and then using the mapping technique, the mapping formalisms, start to explore how each of these contributions related to one another. That triggered further discussion because person A might see statement A leading to statement B via statement C, D, and E, but participant B might see this quite differently through a totally different chain of argument. So what we found with using the oval mapping is that people were able to move from divergence to convergence and be able to make sense of not only their own thinking, but others' thinking on that particular problem situation that we were working on. And the oval mapping allowed people to be able to see the whole, which was really quite attractive to them. They could see the big picture. Unfortunately, ovals, of course, are static. And that led naturally into moving towards capturing the material in the oval maps into the software, which had moved from originally COPE to Decision Explorer because of enhancements in both graphics and processing power, and allowing them to work with these Decision Explorer maps, as Colin has already touched on, transitional objects. So as people looked at the different contributions, being able to see these on a projected screen, they would make additions, edits, and it would move from being statements from one individual to being statements that had gone through a range of changes, reflecting the group's transition of thinking over time. And one of the nice things about oval mapping and Decision Explorer is it allowed people to come together to be able to listen effectively to one another and begin to make sense of that world. So we were very influenced by Carl Weick's notion of sense making, make sense of their world, both socially as well as cognitively, because they could hold on to the ideas, they could move from the physiological to the cognitive, and therefore reach agreements that way. And we very much had the aim of not just getting a cognitive agreement of thinking, a procedural rationality agreement, but also an emotional one where you had commitment to something. And some of the stuff that Colin and I, both thought and talked about was notions of procedural justice and procedural rationality. And that gave rise to a publication in 2004, Visible Thinking, which was produced with two of our colleagues, John Bryson and Charles Finn, and provided a range of real experiences, moving from both the use of cognitive maps to this client group SODA 2 orientation of maps, where we'd actually used case studies from real organizations. So that was very much SODA 2. That then naturally gave rise to SODA 3. And that's predominantly through an awful lot of the work we were doing with organizations, because this is very grounded in our consultancy experience with organizations, is many of the problems we were asked to work with, the strategic problem solving, they gave rise to strategic directions for the organization. As they began to resolve the problem, that got them thinking about that particular organization or that particular group's future. And there was a natural transition from problem solving to strategy making. So that's the, if you like, the detecting of emergent strategy. We began to find ourselves working quite extensively with top management teams. One of the particularities, of course, of top management teams is they have very little time. They're time poor. And therefore, we began to realize that we needed to be able to help them come to agreement in no more than 2 days. I think, you know, for the vast majority of the workshops Colin and I did, they would be in that 1 to 2 days. It was nice doing 2 days because they had the overnight to think about it, to reflect on it, and have some social time. It goes back to that social agreement as well as cognitive agreement, some social time together. In some instances, I remember it being a little too social, and starting the next morning was a little slow. But nevertheless, that helped with the social bonding. One of the things we did realize, though, is if we're going to concatenate this down to 1 to 2 days, we needed more productivity from the process point of view. And so we saw Decision Explorer become enhanced through the use of Group Explorer and group maps being developed directly with participants. So as you can see in that bottom right picture, individuals, these top management team members, were able to put their contributions in through a laptop and have those contributions projected onto a shared screen in front of the group. That allowed them to speak simultaneously, which was obviously very helpful from a productivity point of view, but it also gave us an enhanced sense of anonymity, which enabled participants to be more open than they might have been otherwise, because of all of the conformity pressures that often groups experience. So we were enabled to get higher productivity, we were enabled to get content being, if you like, generated in a greater extent. We also, from a process point of view, saw that 1 day, now if we did 2 days, it would follow the same pattern, breaking into 4 sessions, 2 before lunch, 2 after lunch. And we aimed to make sure that each of those sessions had a clear, tangible product, a deliverable, so that groups could see easily the progress that they were making towards that agreement, that particular strategy. So thinking about the process, but also we spent a lot of time thinking about the structure of strategy. You're like, this is the modeling side, this is understanding how these different contributions knit together. And so came up with that strategy structure where the overarching statements were typically the goals and negative goals or ramifications. These were supported by strategies that were initially supported by the options, but as the groups transitioned and began to socially and cognitively make agreements, they moved from options to agreed actions. So we were able to see how actions supported strategies, supported goals. So it gave a degree of coherency and robustness. And we were also able to ensure that the actions could be associated with individuals so that there were roles and responsibilities associated with that. And of course, with the structure of strategy, and as Colin has touched on, able to do the analysis of maps so that we could check if everybody had done their actions by particular times, that if we were making progress on actions, then we should see the same progress reflected in the strategies, and if not, could raise some quite interesting questions. This work was very much influenced by both Fisher and Urey and Fisher and Brown's work, which comes from the Harvard School of Negotiation, where what we saw is rather than fighting over old options, the ability, by using both Group Explorer and Decision Explorer, the ability to continually transition and edit things meant that the contributions, the options, could move from being mine or yours to being a shared product, a win-win, moving the group forward. And so, you know, we saw the initial book, Making Strategy, The Journey of Strategic Management, come out in 1998, where Journey was jointly, because it was very much a social process, socially negotiated order, as well as negotiated social order, balancing rationality with justice. So it's jointly understanding, being reflective, negotiating, and then the strategy, which is the why, that helped us move into that. As we said, in 2000, we were using Group Explorer, but more recently, in 2019, Colin and I were involved with some colleagues in developing a new version of the software, which is called Strategy Finder. And Strategy Finder now runs on the web and allows us, we've been running over the last 3 or 4 months, workshops, which takes us into the next slide, which I'll go on to in a minute. But in addition to that, Colin and I have very much been involved with action research, where we've taken concepts and theories from a range of different disciplines, that's a theory, and explored its efficacy in practice. But then through many iterations, working with many, many groups over many, many years, that practice has informed theory. So it's symbiotic, it's cyclical. So moving more into strategy making, that then gave rise to SODA 4, or Journey Making 2. And as a result of our experiences with working in strategy making, we began to identify 4 forums or workshop designs, all predicated on the causal mapping technique. Now, the strategy as issue management naturally flows from the problem structuring side. It was understanding the issues, but strategy came out, emerged from resolving those issues. And it wasn't too big a jump to see strategy's purpose, spending time being quite particular about what the purpose of the organization or that particular part of the organization that we were working with, what was its purpose. So both the strategy's issue management and strategy's purpose were perhaps natural, if you like, evolutions from the problem structuring genesis that we had. But as we began to work with organizations more, 2 further forums emerged as being complementary, both to the use of mapping, but also strategy making. The first was competitive advantage, and this was helping people make sense of their competences, particularly the distinctive competencies that they had. The first part was actually identifying them and beginning to realize those particular distinctive competencies that the organization had. So again, very much influenced through the resource-based view of the firm and some of the dynamic capabilities of literature. So what were the distinctive competencies? How did those distinctive competencies lead to outcomes? So we might have a range of distinctive competencies that would give us an outcome of, say, for example, an excellent reputation. That excellent reputation is hard to manage, but the actual competencies are much more manageable. So he was trying to help managers be able to practically manage their strategy and exploit their competitive advantage. So we ended up with, again, a conceptual structuring of assets informing competencies, informing competency outcomes, and where the particular formulations, the connections between these competencies could give rise to something that was distinctive in its own right, whether it's distinctive in the bundle of particular competencies acting in concert, or even more particularly, forming a feedback loop that was dynamic and sustainable over time. So again, it helped us build that strategic conversation. And augmenting that was the forum on thinking about stakeholder management and beginning to recognize that stakeholders, both within the organization, but also outside it, had a huge impact on what could be done strategically, both in enabling it, but also disabling it. And so we spent time developing the strategy making process so that we could identify not only the stakeholders, but the relationships, the social and informal and formal relationships between them, understand the bases of interest, understand the bases of power. Each of those forums, whilst can be done in its own right and could be started in any order, actually complement one another and enable the integration. So it's very much moving in that direction. And that gave rise to the Making Strategy book, Mapping Out Strategic Success in 2011. And then more recently, Visual Strategy, where we again collaborated with John Bryson, who has extensive experience in strategy making for public and non-profit organizations. But we've also used mapping on a number of other projects. A number of you may be aware of the work that we've done linking it to system dynamics modeling, where the mapping has allowed us to get an understanding of the situation. And our first introduction to this was in disruption and delay modeling for litigation. What had actually gone wrong? What were all the different views of the triggers and the associated consequences of those that had occurred? We began to be able to identify feedback loops, and that material provided the skeleton for system dynamics models that then enabled us to start looking at the quantum. So the combination of our mapping through using Decision Explorer and Group Explorer to allow us to understand causality and its connection with the system dynamics modeling that allowed us to understand quantum was complementary, and again, very much in the mixing methods arena, which many problem structuring methods have spent time in. The systemic risk assessment was moving from perhaps a forensic retrospective view to now doing it much more prospectively. How can we work using Group Explorer and teams of people, understand what the risks were and the systemicity of risks, and then through the analysis of maps, understand where the priorities are, and therefore be able to more effectively mitigate them. And that's moved us from working in a same time, same place arena to starting to move into a different time, same time but different place arena, which is where we are currently and where we're going to be looking more in terms of the future. We're doing our OR conference online. COVID's changed our world. We have limited travel, economic restrictions, and with Zoom, with Teams, with Skype, with Jitsi, with WebEx, whatever, we're now able to get together. We've still got these incredible complex problems, but with a new version of the mapping software Strategy Finder, what we're being able to do is actually work on these problems together using much of the processual knowledge and expertise, but doing it over the web. So it's giving us greater opportunities for inclusive engagement and making sure that we've got attended to those procedural justice and rationality arguments. And one of our colleagues, Kevin Page, has been working extensively with NHS Scotland using the software to amazing effect. I've been using it, Colin's been using it, and we're seeing people really engage and buy into it. So just to finish, because I'm quite conscious that Martin's just put 2 fingers up and that didn't sound quite right. Strategy Finder, it allows us to get to fast agreements. It allows us to run large-scale strategy workshops. You can manage those in bite-sized chunks. We are developing it so that there will be automation. It'll provide you with aid to walking through the strategy development, through helping you identify some of these virtuous and vicious cycles, be able to identify some of the key actions, understand your goals. It has built-in prioritization mechanisms for assessing consensus and will be able to automatically produce draft statements of strategic intent. If you're interested in seeing it, Colin and I would love to show it, so please contact us. Before we finish, and these slides, as Colin I think mentioned, they will be available to everybody. What we did do is put together some readings chunked into SODA mapping and problem structuring, strategy making, more general use of mapping in SODA, more about the analysis and research methods using mapping, thinking about teaching mapping and other applications of mapping. But please feel free to get in touch with us at any time. So I'm now going to hand over to Alberto and Leila and stop sharing my screen.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Good morning to everybody, and very good morning to all of you from the northwest of England. Good evening to Fran in Australia. And thanks to everybody who's joining us to this session. On behalf of Leila and myself, just let me say that it is a great pleasure and an honor indeed to share this panel with Fran and Colin, who, as we know, have contributed to the OR community a huge deal. From the presentation that Fran and Colin has just done, we can clearly say that SODA is a methodology that has evolved over time. It used to compare to another well-known soft OR method, SSM. We can clearly say that there is a difference between the two, in the sense that SODA has adapted to the times and has incorporated new sources and new ideas, especially software. Whereas SSM, in that sense, it has remained the same. So the other difference with SSM is that although SODA is well known and is being used quite a lot, there has not been many studies about the use of SODA, in which fields has been used. So the motivation of our presentation is this, that we attempt to survey the use of SODA in not only in the OR field, but in other fields as well. And I think it deserves this type of a study to assess the development and also to see how it has evolved over time. I must stress that our paper is a paper that has been submitted to the Journal of Operational Research, the European Journal of Operational Research, and it uses this range of time from 1989 to 2018. And there's a reason for that, and it is because in 1989, this book was published, The Rational Analysis for a Problematic World, by Jonathan Rosenhead. Since then, a second edition of the book has been produced. But in this first book, there is an account of the soft OR methodologies that have been widely used in the UK and other parts of the world. And you can see that SSM is mentioned there, and also SODA. So we did our survey starting in 1989 because we believe that that was the year in which the soft OR was fully recognized in the OR community. The other, just let me go to the previous one. The other point is that our survey goes up to 2018 because in 2019, last year, we produced this paper and we submitted the paper to EJOR, and it's still under review. So it looks a bit outdated, but 2019 is a good year. It's 30 years to assess the development of soda. Now, soda, as Fran has explained, has evolved, and they are at the moment in a soda 4 version. Now, our take on this, on the use of soda, uses this framework. And essentially, we try to assess papers that have used soda in its basic form, as it were. So in an early paper of Colin and Fran, they specify that soda has 3 theoretical perspectives: the individual, technology and technique, the nature of organizations, and the consulting practice. And we translate these theoretical perspectives into what we call stages or activities of a soda application. And these are the 3: modeling the situation, providing common understanding, and supporting group negotiation. So these are the lens through which we are going to see, we are going to survey, or we survey, I must say, the application of soda. So papers who have followed these steps have, in a way, adhered to the core of the soda message. And we will see in the presentation when Leila will explain the initial results, that some papers have used this in this way, but other papers have not really used, especially the latter stages of soda. So this is the way that we structure the paper. So you can see at the top of the screen, and this is our agenda. So I explain the objective, the context, and our conceptual framework for the study. And Leila is going to explain the methodology of the study, how we survey the papers. And she's going also to present briefly 2 cases and the initial results. And hopefully we'll have time for some brief conclusions and also some questions at the end. So I'm just going to hand over to Leila now.
Good morning from Brazil. Thank you to the organizers and the chairs. First step was to compose a database for our study. The data sources we used were Scopus, Web of Science, and the reference of the articles themselves. We expected to have a collection in the order of hundreds of the articles. This information was based on publication of other articles based on the PSM usage, such as soft system methodology gated 150 articles in a 15-year period of analysis. However, searching for words such as cognitive map resulted in thousands of articles. So the solution was to use a combination of keywords, which was effective for our purpose. The combination is in the slide as soda and operation research, soda and the strategic option development and analysis, soda and Eden, soda and Ackermann, cognitive map and Eden and Ackermann, and cognitive map and operation research. We set some filters for our search, such as just using articles in English language, only empirical practice of soda, and the publications from 1989 to 2018, a 30-year period. We excuse why we use the articles, because they are subject to peer revision and with a certain validation. We excluded the book chapters, dissertation, thesis, conference proceedings, and the theoretical articles. The final list of 200 articles is available under request. Just email us or wait the publication of our article currently under submission. Our methodology was quite simple and intuitive, reading and classifying. The classification was based on SOD activities that Alberto listed, model the situation, provide common understanding, and support group negotiation. Some elements that we selected in a first evaluation, like individual interviews rather than group or documents, the use of cognitive map, the use or not of bipolar constructs, the use of SODA workshop. We also evaluate the area and context of application, the level, if you combine the use or a pure exclusive use, and the countries and the regions of application. So our objective was to identify the areas of applications, the ways of application, and the center communities of research and consulting in SODA. Next. Next, Alberto. Yes, so here we start with some very interesting results. We have here the number of articles published year by year. And we see that there is a continuous and gradual increase. Yes, back. We have some peaks in 1997, 2007, and 2015. That was not the purpose of this work, to understand the ups and downs, but we believe that special editions on related issues such as OR and the social sciences, applications of soft OR and problem structuring methods promoted the SODA among the academics. Next, yes. I love this map, yeah. This word map shows, calm down, Alberto.
Okay, go.
Yeah. Okay, this word map shows the locations where the case studies were conducted, not necessarily the country of publication of the article. The darker the country, the more SODA applications that were identified. And we see Brazil, we are in a good position. We see England as well. Next, please, yeah. More than 50% of SODA applications is concentrated in 5 countries. UK, I think it's unexpected and confirmed the result. You are the cradle of the alternative paradigm and the origin of the PSMs. And number 2, Portugal. This is a very interesting and recent result, because 1/3 of the publications dated of 2018 and the first article is in 2000. Brazil, similar to Portugal, but more reserved and a little late growth, first article in 2007. And if I considered articles in Portuguese, certainly we would be number 1. Number 4, very interesting, because USA is recognized by their focus on the classical and the hardware, and we proved here that it is not true. And number 5, Italy, very similar to Brazilian and Portuguese profile. We identified 32 contexts that we joined in 11 major areas. And 3 main areas dominate more than 50% of SODA applications. First, strategic management in many sectors. The second is the context of the organization context. So we have cases in knowledge management, project management, risk management, product development, quality management, and supply management. And number 3, very in vogue, sustainable development and environment management. But we can see SODA in many sectors. In this plot, we can see the level of applications if you combine the use methodology or if a pure application in period of 10 years, in the 30-year period that we analyzed. From the beginning, the combined use was already prevailing and popular among the academics. And the trend is to increase because in the first 10 years, almost 30% of SODA cases were a pure SODA application. In contrast, in the most recent 10 years, this number has been reduced to 20%. And which sort of combinations do academics make? Again, it was not the main purpose of this work to evaluate such combinations, but the integration to multi-criteria decision analysis tools really took our attention. And here we list Macbeth, AHP, and ANP especially. The combination of any combination enriches the perspective of the decision situation. But our study confirms the statement from Maternay, Leila, and Alberto that in the case of SODA and cognitive mapping, they facilitate the development of comprehensive indicators, qualitative factors for decision-making frameworks that include MCDA tools. Here, amongst the 3 activities that we evaluated, model the problematic situation and provide a common understanding, are being considered by academics. Who did not model the situation, use the predefined concepts, for instance. Who did not provide a common understanding, use the individual analysis of maps or even other methodologies in place. The point here is the support group negotiation activity. Very few cases consider this activity. In case of pure application, this was replaced by structural analysis of the maps. And in case of multi-methodologies, other methods addressed this activity. It's what we saw. And we have some examples in the next slide. Here we give 2 examples of partial use of SODA. First example is a combined case in the tourism sector. A collective cognitive map was developed. However, other methodologies here, Value 3 and Macbeth, supported the group negotiation. In the second example, it's a pure SODA application. Cognitive maps were made individually, followed by the aggregation of such maps. Finally, a very detailed structural analysis was effectively used to set the strategic actions. And
okay, Leila, we're nearly running out of time. If you could move it along, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
If we can just mention the application, the conclusions, Leila.
I think I need more 2 minutes. I needed the previous ones. I think it's quite important. The previous one, Alberto, please. Among the elements that we evaluated, we have the individual inquiry against other approaches, such as group or documents, or possible and acceptable in the methodology with certain advantages and disadvantages. The cognitive map should not be an element of evaluation because it is in most times understood as the methodology. However, we found some cases that didn't use cognitive map. They were inspired in SODA, and the academics were performing statistical analysis of concepts. The bipolar construct that we consider fundamental for the methodology, but it is completely forgotten. And SODA workshop, the denial of the use, we believe that is quite linked to the multi-methodology, the combination to the other methodologies, and it's something to be understood. And our conclusions, you can go to our conclusions. In my opinion, SODA is a social and very powerful methodology that gives voice to those involved. The methodology is growing. We have some communities to work with in UK, in Portugal, and Brazil. The publications are spread in 128 journals. They are not concentrated in OR journals, but we have some misuse or abuse on the methodology, especially not using bipolar constructs and using the methodology for problem structure, not developing strategies. It's what we saw, okay? Thank you very much. And here we have our content.
Thank you very much, Leila, Alberto, Fran, and Colin. That was absolutely fantastic and really interesting. unfortunately, because we're trying to cram so much in, we only have about 10 minutes for questions. So we're going to have to race through them a bit. I just wanted to put up one slide. While everybody's upvoting those questions, we have 8 there at the moment. If you want to ask anything else, please do ask, because we will compile the questions afterwards and give them out to our panelists, and they will answer them for you. So please don't think that you shouldn't put one up now just because it's a bit late in the day. Now, if I could stop sharing those slides and very quickly share mine. Ooh, if I can find it, there we go. I just wanted to very quickly say, we are the Problem Structuring Methods Special Interest Group, and we will be having a meeting very soon. It will go up to full screen, there we go. And the PSM SIG AGM is going to be on the 29th of September, so it's not very far away. It's going to be on Zoom between 5:30 and 6:30. We'd love as many of you as possible in attendance to make decisions about where the SIG's going next. We would also really like to share some best practice on how to apply PSMs, particularly in this time of COVID-19 when it's really difficult. And touched on that in the presentation that she gave for her and Colin. We would also like to update some of the items from last year. So we decided that the most important things to do were a repository of cases, some teaching materials and talks by leaders in the field. We want to hear your opinions on that, what you think should go into those. So if we could see you on that date, that would be lovely. Thank you. So now I am going to stop sharing so that we can see everybody, and we'll very quickly go to some of the top questions. So first one here from Jonathan Flowers. I'd be interested to hear experiences of applying these methods with groups of elected people who, even with the context of a shared political party group, may be reluctant to expose their inner maps to each other. Now, who would like to answer that? We go, Fran.
Firstly, and hand over to Colin if he wants to pick up on it. I've only done it once. I was doing it for a shire council. I think that probably equates in the UK. It was newly elected. It was formed from a real problem situation where they had to pretty much throw the old lot out and bring the new lot in because of corruption and all sorts of other nastiness. And we used Group Explorer in this arena. We had people at 17, 18 being elected all the way through till, I think the oldest was probably in his 70s, with varying degrees of understanding of how one another saw it in terms of moving that particular shire forward, how they would work together as a group, different levels of sophistication of thinking, etc. And we only spent a half day. That's all I'd got to do with. And we were able to do in that half day get a really clear idea of what the goals of the council and some of their priorities might be. And that worked tremendously well. The anonymity certainly helped people become much more able to have their say than I think would have otherwise been the case. So I think that would probably be my comments. My only time I've done it with elected members. Colin, do you want to pick up anything else on that?
Just a quickie, really. Equally as with Fran, I've little experience of that. Although working with multi-organisational groups does have some similarities with elected groups, where you've got representatives from a wide range of different organisations. I've done quite a lot of work in the USA of that ilk, particularly on the Great Lakes, and some of the problems they've been facing, where we've had 30 different organisations together working with Group Explorer, each of them actually acting as a representative of their own organisation. I think there are some similarities there with elected groups, but it would be interesting to get some experience with elected groups.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Thankfully, the next question is quite a nice one for Alberto and Leila. Have you considered how you might assess its use by OR practitioners working in consultancies and OR groups who are unlikely to write academic papers?
It's a good question, but the only way will be to interview the practitioners, because we base our survey on published papers. yeah, it might be an idea to follow, to get the contacts of consultants, people or practitioners, and interview them. And also maybe have access to their publications, because I think consultants at the end, they don't, they probably write a report, and if we can have access to that, that will be the source for the evaluation of it. Can I just mention also to the previous question? I think it's important the role of the facilitators in any SSM or CODA or SODA or soft OR application. And I think you know, Colin and Fran, because of their experience on dealing with people, that facilitates the method that they use and the message they want to pass. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything, Leila?
I think it's we have always to give the chance, the opportunity, even for the facilitator, to make it the individual interview. Yeah, if it's something problematic to have everybody together, or people that does not want to speak, or conflict, try to make it the individual interview and join to the others after. It's my opinion.
Okay, there was one that you answered in the chat that I think is quite an interesting one, that's from Ian Mitchell. How important is sponsorship by a senior personality in a client organisation to getting these techniques applied within them?
I think it's an interesting one. I think until recently I would have said very important that you need somebody to lead it. But recent work I've been doing with Strategy Finder, I don't think there is a single sponsor. We're working with a range of different groups. So we've got people from commercial fishing, recreational fishing, we've got regulators, it's all in the decommissioning space. And what we're being able to do is, through using Strategy Finder, you know, these people are scattered around Australia, up north in Darwin, over east in Brisbane and Sydney. Something without Strategy Finder I'd never be able to run. It's that ability, okay, the time zones are sometimes a little bit more challenging, but the ability to allow people to be able to see the map, to be able to type their contributions in and start to change their minds and get a much better holistic understanding has been fantastic. And so the sponsor, I think it depends on what you're trying to do with it. If you're trying to help people move forward in a particular situation, then I don't know how much a sponsor is necessary. If you're trying to change an organization's strategy, then I think it probably does have, you know, an importance. Colin, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think in general for strategy making in an organization, you do need a powerful sponsor, as Fran suggests. But a lot of the work that we've done has just required somebody to say, how about we try this to work on this messy problem? And just persuading others to give it a try. And then they've all found that it's actually been very useful and wanted to continue use. And that we're finding that in these 1-hour sessions with Strategy Finder at the moment, where a group of people will try something simply because they're now in a different environment given COVID.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Did you want to add anything to that, Alberto or Leila?
No, no, no,
okay.
thank you. No.
So we'll move on to, I like this question. Well, that one's got 5. Okay, I'm going to do the 5 one. So as SODA evolved from SODA 1 to SODA 4, did the idea of bipolar constructs, the equals rather than change? And this is really relevant with the work that Alberto and Leila have done, I think. We only have a couple of minutes and may get cut off, okay?
Can I just comment on that one? Because we've always found right from the beginning that, of course, people don't naturally find it easy to express the contrasting pole. It's a crucial part of understanding the meanings in an interview. And so often the interviewer is exploring that, trying to encourage somebody to try and answer the rather than, because they wouldn't do that naturally. So often as we move forward, if you want to do something quickly, you tend to have to make guesses at that. Sometimes the facilitator will pop a contrasting pole in and try it out on a group just to see whether it actually expresses the feeling of the group in terms of what the contrast is. Contrasting poles are absolutely crucial to understanding the meanings behind what people say. but it's not surprising that they don't come out very easily in the beginning. And certainly during group sessions, it's much less likely that contrasting poles will appear. So if you're going to work easily and quickly, just simple causal mapping without contrasting poles is the quick and easy way to use it, and then rely upon the ins and outs as the expression of meaning rather than the contrasting pole.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for talking today. Sorry, Martin got cut off because of his crackly connection, so that's why he wasn't able to speak as much as we would have liked. Love to see you all very soon at our SIG meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for me.